立法會主席。
President. We will resume the debate in the second session on the motion of thanks. Mr. Chiu-chung. Well, this session is about manpower training. And we learned that from the Census and Statistics Department that the birth rate is low. The dependency ratio is such that we have 6 young people supporting an elderly person now, but some years down the road it will be 2 to 1. In the Hon LEUNG Yiu-chung era, construction of housing was halted, although we knew we would need more units. So we have a problem with manpower, which we must address. Many people have complained about the difficulty in recruitment. They work in different trades, securities, transport, catering, and so on and so forth. Let me share with you some figures. In Singapore, among the 3.4 million employees, 1.1 million are the imported labor. In Hong Kong, we have a workforce of 3.3 million. Last year, under the supplementary labor importation scheme, 4,000 came to work in Hong Kong. So why is it that we have such a different manpower situation vis-a-vis that of Singapore? Is said that if we have a shortage of manpower, then pay would go up. That's of course correct. While pay for employees goes up, or all the costs go up. For example, in the past, construction the cost is 2,000. Now it's 6,000. In the past, 500 square feet unit cost 1 million. Now it's 3 million. And we are not talking about land premium. In the past, pork chop with rice is $28, and now it's 40 odd. So our income is eroded by inflation. If we do not import labor to help us handle this simple work, we will not be able to cope. On foreign domestic helpers, well, actually we have 340,000 foreign domestic helpers. If we don't have them, what would happen to Hong Kong? That's how we know that we need them for the development of Hong Kong's economy. Let me now turn to the admission of talent. Well, if this place is good, you attract people. And by this I mean that Hong Kong enjoys advantages. So our security is good, our economy is good, but we have housing problems. Property prices are too high. It's a deterrent. The government should do more to attract more talents to come to work in Hong Kong. The younger generation do not want to have more children, but the government should assure these young people that their children will be cared for, and we don't have sufficient child care service. But since this session is not about housing, I'll reserve my comments on that issue later. Mr. LEUNG Yiu-chung.
Now, there are some new ideas in elderly policy, but it's written in an encrypted manner. What does it say? It says that for the government will consider providing more flexibility to import carers for elderly homes. So what exactly does it mean? Because it's kind of scary to hear that. But carers, what does importing carers mean? That's actually importation of labor that Carrie Lam and Law Chi-kong always said. Now, I'm against such policy which disregards the interest of local workers. Now, it's often said that there is a shortage of the junior workers, and so there's need to import carers to meet the strong demands in the sector. It may sound right, but actually it doesn't make sense at all. There's no it's not justified, and they're trying to divert attention. The secretary never explained that. Now, for from statistics, what's the median wage of carers? $11,500 last year, compared to the median wage in the territory. There's a difference of some $4,700, close to $5,000, because the median wage for others is about $15,000. And what sort of work do carers do? You know, they work long hours, 10 hours or more. And then they look after elderly who may have emotional problems, and they may have the job may be obnoxious in nature, but because of but the pay is only $11,500, who would want to do it? Have you considered that? And then apart from the obnoxious nature of the job, there is also shortage of manpower. You're making them suffer, really. Aren't you, being unfair? And then you say, okay, there's not enough manpower, so let's import workers. That's just a stopgap measure. Doesn't address the issue. For the imported workers or local workers, the nature of the job and the allowance and so on, these are issues you need to address. Otherwise, you'll never address the problem. Now, if you can import labor for one industry, you can then start with another one. There'll be a knock-on effect. So you'll be bringing in labor for many different trades eventually. In the 17th, 80s, we imported labor. What happened? Local workers were unable to find work. The wage of local workers kept dropping. That's the consequence. Did the government ever think about that? Now, you're saying that unemployment rate is really low here. It's almost zero unemployment. Yes, it's the case now, but can you guarantee it will be the case in future? Because the economy keeps changing, the circumstances keep changing. So there's no guarantee. Unless the director could assure that it's not going to happen, then it's a different story. But now, the thing is, if you bring in workers now, what happens to the local workers? Now, I also run training courses for carers, and they kept telling me, don't let them import labor. If they want to address this problem once and for all, they must completely overhaul the pay and conditions of service. Otherwise, they're not going to let you off easily. Secretary, so please think this through carefully. Another issue. For many private homes, now, if I've got my figures right, about 80% of those residents in these homes receive CSSA to pay for the homes. And you know the CSSA rate is low. And homes, of course, make a profit because they're privately run. So with that amount of money, how can they also enhance the working conditions and pay of their staff? So it's not possible. If you want to improve the situation, you really have to consider giving support to the homes. If you just rely on subvention, even if you import labor, it's not going to solve the problem. And then there are many other issues related to shortage of manpower, and these issues are going to stay. So don't evade the real issues. Don't try to just look at address the side issues. That's not going to address the core of the problem at all. Now, for elderly residents, they need to be taken care of. They stay in the homes around the clock. There has to be someone to communicate with them and help them. If you bring in imported labor, they don't share the same culture and customs. How can they take good care of the elderly? If you think there's a need to improve elderly homes, yes, I agree that's the case. But don't think that you can solve the problem just by importing labor. If you don't address the root of the problem, the problem will just persist. Now I'd like to talk about education. Carrie Lam often mentioned young people. She says she's very much concerned about them. She wants to talk to them, and she wants to listen to them. So she puts it really nicely. But then in education policy, in the policy address, she's always repeating the same points. There are very, very few new initiatives. And one of the most important serious issue, of course, is youth suicide, but there's no mention of it at all. All she said was about life planning. Now, I'm not saying life planning is not good, but can it really then address the suicide issue? No, she's not really tackling the issue. She's not considering the learning pressure of young people. And what about their dim prospects? She's not mentioning that either. And when the C came for the question and answer session, Mr. Siu Ka-chen asked how she's going to resolve the youth suicide. She just pulled a long face. She didn't answer. But there is need actually for a comprehensive response to the issue. Unfortunately, the government just won't do it. Last week, I met with a group of parents and children who were very much concerned about youth suicide. We went to the C's office to send in a petition letter. Now, the C didn't come out to receive the letter. No officials came out to receive the letter. So what sort of attitude is that? I really doubt if the government is sincere about addressing the issue. On integrated education, we've talked about it for many years. We say there's need for a comprehensive review, but then the government has not done so. There are several points we have to consider. One, I've been helping deaf students for bilingual education, that is sign language education and spoken education. But the government just ignores us, and it comes up with non-reasons to say that for sign language there is not a standard set of sign language, so it can't be done, blah, blah, blah. Actually, last year, I moved a motion debate on sign language, making it an official language. I mentioned this point. Whether there's a standard set of sign language, that's not the real issue. The issue is whether the government will consider it. Like in this council, we did not have a sign language interpreting. Now we do, and the service keeps improving. And many deaf friends told me that they would actually follow the sign language interpreting here. So we've been in meetings with the Secretariat to keep improving the service. It's the same if we have sign language, bilingual education with spoken instructions as well as sign language instructions, then we could just keep improving it, but we need to start first. So I hope Secretary for Education will consider this issue. Improve it, please. And apart from bilingual education, I want to talk about the SEN students, students with special education needs. Now we see an increasing number of SEN students, but unfortunately, the government is putting little resources into that, so they cannot really take care of the needs. And there aren't many professionals providing service, yet the government is not training professionals. So that's why for most schools, they don't know how to deal with SEN students. Yes, you say teachers will have 80 hours to learn about the SEN needs and the way to teach them, but just 80 hours, how can that equip teachers to deal with SEN students properly? Now, I've taught for some 30 years. As long as there's one SEN student in the class, and if something happened and the whole class couldn't carry on with the lesson, if there could be more support staff, then we could address such issues. But then government just gives you a bit of money and say, okay, you sort it out on your own. But in other countries like the UK or Taiwan, they have legislation. So for all stakeholders, the education sector, teachers, parents, and school boards, they all gather together to see how they could provide support to SEN students.
去過台灣。
I have visited Taiwan to meet parents and SEN students. They have dedicated manpower to take care of these students. If they have learning problems, they will be given extra time, extra opportunity to catch up. Many SEN children have high IQ. If a suitable curriculum and learning structure is provided, they can do well. But the government is not willing to face up to this issue. I remember Dr. Fernando CHEUNG has submitted a proposal along the line of the Taiwanese model some time ago. I would like the government to seriously consider legislating for measures to help SEN students so they can really learn, so that their full potential can be developed. President, I don't think I can thank the CE for this policy address. I mentioned two major problems already, and there are problems with other themes and initiatives, so I cannot support the motion. So I submit. Mr. Ma Feng-kuo, President, this year's policy talks a lot about SEN. There will be injection of funds for certain research, and also the provision of bursary and scholarship to the local graduates engaged in research. And there will be a fund on university hostels to address the shortage problem. All these are improvements to existing problems and have my support. Let me now talk about making Chinese history an independent subject in primary and secondary schools, and junior secondary schools. There will be the second phase of consultation on this subject. I support it, and I have already expressed my support previously. As a Chinese person, as a member of the Chinese race, we should all learn Chinese history. So should students. Some 90% of secondary schools have an independent subject called Chinese history. But even if they only offer this in 1 or 3 junior secondary years, it would be counted as having one. The other schools would combine Chinese history with Western history or cultural subjects. And as the Chinese history as a subject will be dismantled, they will have learning on bits and pieces of Chinese history. Now we have this opportunity to update the curriculum, and junior secondary schools would be able to study Chinese history on a continuous and comprehensive basis. The Education Bureau has embarked on a second phase consultation, and then 76% of the last sessions will be on Chinese and Hong Kong histories, and cultural and other elements will account for the 10% plus. So the students will have to cover the ancient history to Qing history. The ratios have to be looked into. Usually, in the second half of the Form 3 school year, students would cover the 1911 resolution. One wonders whether there will be sufficient time for the students. Would they just wrap up things quickly and hastily because of lack of time? To avoid this, we need to balance the curriculum elements, or we should further condense the curriculum. We should give more weight to some subjects and omit certain other minor subjects. These issues can be controversial. I hope the authority would listen to the views of stakeholders. There's a body of public opinion saying that this time we should have dedicated teachers for Chinese history. Of course, if we can do that, it would be best. According to the Education Bureau, in 2016-17, only 49% of students are taught by teachers who major in Chinese history. And even if we count history as a major, it was just 67. So having a dedicated history teacher to teach the Chinese history subject is a long-term goal. The government should continue to provide more training and provide support in terms of teaching material and curriculum development. Another important issue is to arouse interest of students in Chinese history. Since the introduction of a new secondary school curriculum, fewer and fewer students have taken Chinese history, and this is not regarded as an important subject. And many students are not interested in Chinese history, and very few opt for this elective subject. So we should look into ways to attract more students to elect this subject. Otherwise, Chinese history will become marginalized, and there will be no way we can train up more teachers so that all the Chinese history teachers are majoring in history. On the $5 billion of financial expenditure for the Education Bureau, the CE announced measures soon after her election. For example, $30,000 of non-means test assistance will be provided to students, and for those going to the mainland for further studies, they will get $5,000, and the teacher to student ratio will be increased by 0.1. All these show the commitment of the government, and all these measures only take up 3.6 of the additional expenditure. The policy address is silent on how we are going to spend the $1.4 billion. All that has been said is that there will be more discussion with the education sector. In this council, we have been asking for more publicly funded first degree places for students, so that those who are qualified and eligible will not be kept away. And we should have the teacher to student ratio increased by 0.3 instead of 0.1. We need to have more teachers in the permanent establishment. This will benefit both the teachers and students. For students who choose to go to the mainland to further their studies, the financial support given to them is insufficient. At present, they can get at most $15,000 a year. And yet they have to pay tuition fees in the range of 5,000 to 6,000 renminbi yuan, and we have not yet counted the other costs of living. So the assistance is insufficient. For this, for the introduction of the non-means tested subsidy of 5,000, it's just a small drop in the bucket, and they only cover 156. Tertiary institutions, and many Hong Kong students are not able to be assisted in this way. Since the government is committed in increasing the recurrent expenditure, why can't we set more goals to implement these initiatives earlier? Now let me turn to youth development. We should provide more opportunities for their social participation and involvement in policy and discussion. We should provide them a bigger room for realizing their potential and aspirations. Insufficient space for development is a big problem for young people. Insufficient space is also a big challenge for our cultural sector. And the government would take reference on the ADC space in the Wong Chuk Hang and revitalize industrial buildings. And the premises will be leased at half of the market rent to young people for innovation and creative industry and cultural industry related activities.
首批計劃咧有10棟嘅活化工廠。
Under the first phase, the 10 industrial buildings will be involved providing 100,000 square feet. Such premises will be available in the first half of next year. Such a policy would create a space needed by youth. This should be supported. 90,000 square feet in space is insufficient. In the past 6 and 7 years, space revitalized reached 18.62 million square feet. But among the newly created space, less than 1% has been provided to young people. So it's just a nominal gesture. The plan was devised to reduce the vacancy rate in industrial buildings so that we can convert the premises for the other uses such as creative industries. Since 2010 and all the way when it's completed in 2016, among the 1,400 industrial buildings, only 10% or 150 buildings have been revitalized. And the vacancy rate has dropped from 6.7% to 5%. But because of the revitalization and because of the lack of insufficient space in other economic sectors, we don't know how well the objective has been served. The government should pay attention to the possible effect of crowding out effect of young people's activities. Better policies should be devised for them. For example, the developer in the revitalization process should provide more space for young people for cultural activities and creative industries. At last, the policy address will provide a response to my suggestion that the premises of school idle during non-school hours should be made available to other uses, and there should be more support, such as insurance coverage, security services, and economic incentives should be provided to schools. So schools should be allowed to keep the rent, the major part of the rent collected for other uses, and the premises and facilities so released can meet the demands from other sectors. I hope this very good policy can be implemented as soon as possible. Mr. Cheung Kwok-wan, President, this is the first policy address of the CE, Mrs. Carrie Lam. It contains 49,000 words, the longest since the reunification. But Mrs. Carrie Lam departed from the tradition. she didn't read it out word for word. She wanted to adopt a new style. And the theme is We Connect for Hope and Happiness. After the illegal occupation movement, this theme carries more significance than ever. And we can see from this policy address that it's a pragmatic and comprehensive and forward-looking address.
Now, it addresses the housing needs of the grassroots. It has the starter home scheme and the green farm home ownership scheme, which fills the gap on the housing ladder. And there is also a subsidy scheme, which is non-means tested, to subsidize the transportation expenses of the public. And on economic issues, there are also a number of initiatives on promoting innovation and technology, and also enriching the knowledge of technology for the younger generation. There are criticisms that many of these initiatives are similar to Singapore. For example, there will be an academy for civil servants, and it is said that it is similar to an academy in Singapore. And on the two-tier profits tax rates regime, there is a suggestion that reference has been drawn to the Singapore model, and that is to provide tax breaks for the first 300,000 dollars profits earned. Now, I don't know whether indeed Mrs. Carrie Lam has learned from the Singapore model, but it is not important. What is important is that we devise good measures. Well, what I'm going to talk about will be education. It is close to the heart of the DAB. On education, well, I'd like to first talk about the pressure facing students. In the beginning of this year, according to a recent poll, parents believed that after their children have been promoted to primary school, they face 60% more pressure from school. And even parents think that schoolwork becomes a source of their own pressure, such that they experience headache, insomnia, and they also throw tantrums. So pressure affects children as much as parents. I think as parents we share the same feeling. Nowadays, parents have to study the same number of subjects as their children, and parents need to educate themselves starting from kindergarten all over again. However, we are underestimating the problem. If our mental well-being is affected, then there could be a surge of student suicide cases. The Samaritan Fund, the Samaritan Organization against suicide has pointed out that the number of suicide cases has dropped. However, for the age bracket of 19 to 11 to 19, the number of cases has increased, and there have been an increase in the number of cases for help. And on and for the youngest case, it was just 17, and the number of cases have increased by 23% in 2015. According to the research I cited, the major factors causing stress are parents, followed by schoolwork. And I think this is alarming for parents, as parents are also stakeholders in our education system, and they play a crucial role in the well-being of students. There should be permanent posts in schools to help parents. It's not just about liaising with parents. The schools should make good use of the PTAs to approach parents proactively, to resolve issues by working with parents. But this is not sufficient because apart from the parent-teacher associations, the government should also mount publicity at the community level on cultivating a good culture. There should be a shift in our culture. We should correct the thinking that children must win at the starting line. There should be both official and non-official platforms for parents to share their experience on parenting and also other matters. Mr. President, we understand that there are different causes to students' suicide cases, and we should be objective, but it also has a contagious effect in the community. At the same time, we stress that after a spate of unfortunate incidents, more emphasis should be placed on the life education, and there should also be counseling provided to students to help them deal with emotional issues as well as other issues. And there should also be a gatekeeper role in schools, and there should also be a better manpower arrangement in schools. Whereas for parents, they should observe the emotions of their children so that, if need be, they should be encouraged to seek help from other schools, from parents. And we should also help children to think positively. I think for young people, having suicidal thoughts is the emotions that affect them. For those with positive thinking, they may not be so easily affected by negative emotions. Character training is also important. Parents should not scold their children for not scoring high marks, and parents should refrain from comparing the children to other children, because this could help alleviating the problem. As a parent, I understand that there is a culture of competition. In order for our children to get into the schools to our liking, we tend to force our children to do well. A child may attend 2 kindergarten classes each in the morning and in the afternoon, and we've always hear about children being sent to different extracurricular activity classes. Now, Secretary, I don't know whether you have the same experience. Perhaps you've heard the same from your relatives, your grandchildren. I think it's not just the responsibility of parents. Schools are also to blame. Now, I had recently attended a primary school interview briefing session, and very often we understand that parents prepare portfolio or profile for their children, and the school principal said that they would never accept such portfolio or profiles, and you should not force children to learn by rote model answers. For example, you should not teach the child to say, "I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. Could you tell me the answer, please?" Because this is the result of drilling and learning by rote. And now we understand that there is a paradigm shift of this competition culture when it comes to primary school interviews. Some schools suggest that the parents should not prepare for these interviews. Rather, the school would look at how children react naturally to circumstances. And I think that this is important letting children study happily in schools. And I think that even for parents, it's not just the mental stress. Children also suffer from physical stress. Starting from 2006, the DAB has been weighing school bags for children, and we find that the school bags are getting heavier. According to the Department of Health, the weight of the school bag should not exceed 1/10 of the weight of the child, but 80% of the school children's school bags are overweight. So, on average, school bags are so heavy that it has exceeded the 10-year average. We have been issuing guidelines suggesting schools to provide storage and lockers, and there should also be different ways of handing in assignments, and also there should be better class hours arrangements. However, I can only say that the weight on the shoulders of our children is getting ever more heavier. School bags are putting on so much stress on our children, such that they need to carry so much on their shoulders. And on this point, we hope that the Education Bureau will face this issue and come up with ways to help our children. Their school bags should be lighter. The Education Bureau should also subsidize schools in buying more textbooks and more lockers and storage facilities, so that children don't need to bring so many books to school. Now, we are also concerned about the other issue in the education policy, that is the use of technology. Electronic teaching is also a feasible solution to lessening the weight of school bags. We recently interviewed 70 primary school teachers, and their concern is mostly improving the school campus facilities, revamping I&T equipment in schools, and also promoting e-learning. For students, e-learning is not something new. Starting from 1998, the government published 3 IT and education strategy papers. And now subsidies are given for children to buy tablets for the purpose of e-learning. But we firmly believe that e-learning is so much more than having a tablet in your hand. We need a mix of hardware and software, and we also need on-site facilities for better interaction. So apart from subsidizing schools in upgrading the hardware, the government should also allocate resources to develop a holistic e-learning platform. At the same time, the government can also encourage the education sector and young entrepreneurs to develop different systems and teaching materials, such as teachers paid teachers that other countries have. It's kind of a sharing app. Next, I'd like to talk about providing more support to students with special education needs. At the pre-primary level, for SEN students, at the moment, the Social Welfare Department provides support. Afterwards, it's under the purview of the Education Bureau. For students with special education needs, early intervention and early diagnosis will help address their special needs. So for students with learning discrepancies, they should be supported as early as possible. We have the on-site preschool pre-primary rehabilitation service, and apart from this, for Senko teaching posts, there should be more in the permanent establishment to provide support at the pre-primary level. More importantly, in the community, the government should do more to enlist the help from parents, the social worker sector, and the community to provide comprehensive support so that service units can expand the scope of service from the level of NGOs. For example, the NGOs, social workers, parents, teachers can be supported so that they can take up courses for helping SEN students, and also for NGO centers in the evening and for school premises during non-school hours, they can be utilized so that parents can take part in these activities to alleviate the stress and to provide mutual help for each other. This will be very important support for parents with SEN children.
Chinese history education or teaching. Now, this is, of course, one of the subjects of great concern to us in the policy address. Now, every country has its own history, and if nationals learn about the country's history, it's a good way of education. It also enhance a sense of belonging and a sense of pride towards the country. But then there is insufficient learning in this respect. That's why the DAB welcomes the proposal to make Chinese history an independent and compulsory subject starting from the next school year. Now, during the consultation period, we can see that for the proposed curriculum, it covers the basic law, interaction with other places, reforms, and so on, so that it's an objective and rational way for us to learn about the development of the Chinese people. This is also, the proposed curriculum is also an effective way for us to learn about development of the Chinese nation in recent years. And also we can come to see the historical fact that Hong Kong has always been an inalienable part of China. This will help to foster a sense of belonging to the nation. And then in junior secondary school education, there are certain shortcomings. The government should listen to views and enhance the curriculum. So the new generation could learn more about Chinese history and the developments of the country. And we should give equal emphasis to ancient history and modern history. And for certain teachers who may not be Chinese speaking, or some teachers may face difficulties, so they need more frontline support. BCA, shall we continue with it? The DB believes that the current committee should fully review the effectiveness of BCA last year and then consider very carefully the way forward. If we're going to continue with the BCA, the government must do a proper job in monitoring schools, so we can be sure that schools would not give too much drilling to students. And also, the government must strictly go by the spirit of BCA, that is, the BCA assessments must not be used for assessing a school's performance. Or as some teachers are concerned, the BCA results must not be used as an indicator for closing a school. And then the government must also do more publicity among schools and parents and explain the details of the scheme. This is to address public concern. Thank you. Mr. Gary Chan. Thank you, President. Youth policy has always been a subject close to heart to me. When I was first elected legislator, my first motion was about the young people, the 4 leaves of young people, I put it, and which sounds the same as studies, career, housing, and business startup. So this coincide with the studies, career, and housing issues mentioned by the Chief Executive Carrie Lam. For youth housing, and I've been talking about it for some 10 years. First, it was Mr. Donald Zhang, who was the Chief Executive. Then Mr. C.Y. Leung became the Chief Executive. There was a bit of progress. There's a youth hostel under the charge of Mr. Lau Kwang-wah, the Secretary for Home Affairs. Yes, now we have a youth hostel scheme and we've made some progress, but really the supply is very limited. For example, in my constituency, in Tai Po, there is a block of youth hostel, but there are less than 100 units. Can they really help our young people? Now, this new government has again pioneered something new, started home units for Hong Kong people, and that's a good idea. Young people, the middle class, or professionals with steady income, they could not address their housing needs. So that's why it's necessary for us to put more resources into youth housing. Well, some may say, you're just helping the young people. How come? You help young people buy homes? Is it good for them? Can they really afford it? Well, I think for young people, you just need to give them a hand. When they can have the right conditions, then they can realize their potential. Like Steve Jobs, if he didn't even have a garage, he couldn't have built his first Apple computer. He needed a roof at least. So without even a roof, you know, when people can't even address their basic needs, of course, they won't have interest in building or inventing anything. So for studies, career, and housing, I know the Chief Executive has tried to do a lot for young people. But actually, we do have plenty of room to help young people because we have rich financial resources. I hope the government won't be stingy. And it must also not go by conventional thinking. That is, we only help those in need. Actually, if you help young people is an investment, then they will be able to contribute more to society later on. That's the first point. Second point about youth policy. I mentioned career studies and so on for young people, and then the Chief Executive mentioned studies, housing, and career. And then these issues straddle different bureaus. Now we have the Secretary for Labour and Welfare, and Secretary for Education here. But can we group everything under one body? Now we have a youth commission, that's an advisory body. But I think in terms of policy making, youth policy should take up an important position, and there should be cross-bureau and interdepartmental coordination. I think I'll leave it at this for now. Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? Mr. Yip Kin Yuen. Now, in the past 5 years since I became a legislator, it's been a nightmare. It's the case for me, for many in the education sector and in the community. You know, C.Y. Leung was a conceited person, and he caused a lot of grievances in the community. in terms of human rights, the rule of law, freedom of the press, and so on. We suffered regression on all these fronts. And then in terms of education, politics comes first. And as CY Leung would shamelessly say that he's been adopting meritocracy, but actually he's not striving to make improvements, so we all suffer. So I think in the past few years, probably the darkest period in our history. What's fortunate is that CY Leung did not run for re-election. Carrie Lam became the chief executive. After she won the election, she said, there's a serious rift in the community and there are many grievances. My first task is to mend the rift and address these grievances so that we could all walk forward together united. That's what she said. And this morning I heard from a TV interview by Jasper Zhang. She's continued to say she wanted to mend the rift. She did point out an important issue here in Hong Kong, that is rift and grievances. Many people in Hong Kong are unhappy. The happiness index is probably at its lowest in Hong Kong. So we hope, of course, that Carrie Lam could turn things around and put Hong Kong back on the right track. But can she really do it? Within her term, would Hong Kong move forward or backward? We're all waiting to see. And I'm sure we're all keen to see what will happen. Now, Carrie Lam faces a series of issues. There are many difficulties facing us. Now, CY Leung left a polarized society, and in terms of trust between Hong Kong people and the government, between Hong Kong and Beijing, they are all at an all-time low. Education. Well, if we say it's a mess, maybe that's an overstatement. But yes, education has a good foundation. But since 2000, we've seen many turmoils. In the past few years, we've been battered even. So the problem is now serious. When Carrie Lam took over, that's more or less the situation in our society and in the education sector. Now, first of all, I want to talk about Carrie Lam's education policy. As soon as the new government took office, $3.6 billion was plowed into recurrent spending on education to improve teachers' establishment and also to provide $30,000 for self-financing post-secondary students. So these are, you can say, first aid measures to stop the bleeding for the education sector. The education sector in general accepts these measures from Carrie Lam, and she's made 3 breakthroughs. I mentioned that before. First, we attach importance to wisdom in the community. We will adequately consult the education sector, and we also make a long-term commitment to education through recurrent spending. So we're not just looking at short-term measures. So the policies are no longer made behind closed doors. For the $3.6 billion, it's not just a window dressing. It's not a small favor. It's really about the well-being of the people. This is something the education sector has been fighting for a long time. It's also for education sector to start afresh. So it builds a solid foundation for that. For the Research Endowment Fund, another $10 billion at least will be injected into it, and $12 billion for building university hostels, and then $3 billion to pay for students who take up postgraduate research programs in Hong Kong. Now, they all have great significance for a long-term education development. Now, there's $3.6 billion of additional recurrent spending, and there are other measures too. They all welcome. But I want to analyze the hidden concerns here. One, about education finances. Yes, we're going to have an additional $3.6 billion in recurrent spending. But look at it, but that $3.6 billion only means a 1% increase. It was 22.1% of total government recurring expenditure before, and now it's 22.2%, so it's just an increase of 0.1%. But when CY Leung took office, education accounted for 23% of total government expenditure. Now in 1997, it was actually 23.3%, so this is still a low the current figure is still low.
If we compare ourselves with other countries, the expenditure on education as a percentage of local GDP has only increased by 0.1% after taking into account the $3.6 billion. It's just 3.5% of GDP. The mainland has exceeded 4% some years ago. They have achieved a breakthrough. And after increasing it by $3.6 billion, we're still at a low level. We left behind, far behind, developed countries. Mr. Carrie Lam talked about 4.8%. It's a big gap between 3.5% and 4.8%. Whether you compare it horizontally or vertically with ourselves in history or with other countries, there's still much room to catch up. Catching up is not just to make the figures better. There are genuine needs for further injection of resources. I have been advocating that for the coming 5 years, we should take 2 steps. First, we should inject sufficient resources to stabilize the system. And then we should allow the potential in the education system to be realized. It's not like a person who's been very sick, who's been starving, and now this patient has to go forward. What should we do? The patient should be given nutrients and sufficient rest, and then he can start to move forward again, and then in the hope that he may become a good athlete in the future. But all these would be gradual. But of course, we're not talking about a sequence of action. Some of the actions can take place in parallel. We are not. We compare favorably with other education systems around the world. The question is, what are we doing? How are we achieving? Have we been able to invest properly in terms of resources? And also, what's the initiatives in the policy address? It seems that the momentum has weakened on the part of the government compared with 3 months ago, 6 months ago, or the time when Mrs. Carrie Lam won the election, especially in the primary and secondary education sector. Very few initiatives are on kindergarten, primary and secondary schools. The only significant measure is the air conditioning of schools. This will become the standard equipment and facility for the schools, and subsidy will be granted. Well, I have asked for this for years, and now it's a success. When the school campus is handed over to the school operator, there's no air conditioning. All the air conditioners and the electricity bills are paid by the school. In other words, paid by parents. Now, finally, air conditioners come as part of the standard equipment. It's a piece of good news, or albeit a belated one. But air conditioning for schools is just a small aspect in improving the school campus environment. Actually, there are more important issues. Some members have mentioned the teachers' establishment, whether it can be further improved. Student to teacher to ratio, student ratio, can it be improved? And what about the pay scale for kindergarten teachers? Nothing about these is mentioned in the policy address. We are concerned about a number of matters. 3 months ago, we had a rather good experience. We achieved some breakthroughs. First, there was a proper consultation, and there was the leveraging on collective wisdom. But now, this spirit has weakened in the policy address. The core problems faced by the education system were not addressed. And the excuses are there will be more studies, research, and so on and so forth. But these are straightforward issues, such as the teacher-to-student ratio, which can be improved immediately. And there is also a slippage in the commitment on long-term things. At first, it was $5 billion. Now it's $3.6 billion in additional expenditure. We expect something about the remaining $1.4 billion in the policy address, but there was nothing. So maybe that illustrates diminishing the commitment for the long term. I think we have seen some improvement in our communication with the government. The secretary is here. We are in constant and regular dialogue. I think a further step should be taken, and that is the formal consultative and policy formulation mechanism should take on board views from the wide spectrum of our opinion in the education sector, and there's, of course, room for further improvement. And thirdly, if we value views from different quarters, then the TSA or BCA, which is something the government eagerly promoting, it's been suggested that it will be resumed. Mrs. Carrie Lam proposed the shelving of it, and then there was a review. But there has been no proper consultation. The consultative committees are not representative enough. The questionnaire survey has been criticized as misleading or leading, and some of the members are alleged to have conflict of interest. So is this an ideal setup for making decisions on TSA or BCA? We are concerned about not just the drilling of students, but the decision-making process, whether it's a rational one. TSA has affected the ecology of the teaching environment in the classrooms. I think it would take a very comprehensive review before we can come up with a convincing policy recommendation. President, I hope my attitude is felt by all parties concerned. I'm proactive, I am positive, and I would criticize things that I think should be criticized, and I praise things that I think should be praised. Here, I would like to offer further ideas on what should be done. I hope the government would consider my views. On higher education, much has to be done. This time, the important work is on research. We have had debates in this council, and that is the positioning of the institutions. We should attach importance both to internationalization and localization. In the past 10 years or so, this internationalization policy has been in place. Maybe there's a need to fine-tune or revision. Now we are going to waive graduate school fees for local students. It's just a small part in the solution which allow the local students access to the local graduate programs, which are very expensive. We should offer more scholarship, and we should make better arrangements for associate degree programs. We should look at the incentive we provide and also the career progression ladder for the graduates, and also the role played by our universities. And I'm also concerned about academic freedom, autonomy of tertiary institutions. These are our core values which I hope the government would continue to uphold. Turning to primary and secondary schools, there's much to be done. First, teachers' establishment. People at the front line are very concerned about this, and that is the establishment is a result of the way we share teaching workload. We have to take care of professional development, professional performance appraisal, and other tasks to be handled together with administrative duties. If they are burdened under such heavy workload, teachers will not be able to do their job properly. So the establishment is very important. We have proposed that for primary and secondary schools, every class should get additionally 0.3 teaching posts. We have already increased it by 0.1. We hope that the gradual approach can be adopted. We're not saying that this should be achieved at one go. We should progressively moving towards providing additionally 0.3 teaching posts. This should be a priority. The teachers' establishment should be dealt with first. Next year, we will take a serious look at whether we can have another another increase of 0.1 in establishment. The teachers and the principals are generally in support of this consensus. If we have to compete for resources in the system, well, we're not going to get anything. So this must be the priority. Second, graduate teaching post. As I've said, is a straightforward matter. After the adjustment, 60% of primary school primary teachers are graduates, and 80% in the secondary school are graduates. But basically, all teachers are graduates. So why don't we offer them graduate teaching posts? Again, this should be achieved gradually. There should be gradual improvements, so that teachers doing the same job should receive the same pay. It's a question of equity for teachers. Thirdly, apart from software, we have to look at the hardware. Many school campuses are dilapidated, and some of them are not equipped with a hall or music room or library. We have Matchbox, a school campus in housing estates. In other parts of Hong Kong, there are substandard campuses. they should be redeveloped, or the school should be relocated, or there should be school improvement works carried out in situ, or we should step up repair maintenance. We should do this for all schools. And I've also looked into the installation of lifts. This has to do with whether we have violated the spirit under the Disability Discrimination Ordinance. Campus improvement work, especially for those substandard ones, so that they are on a par with other campuses, would mean that we provide an equal education opportunity for the students in these substandard campuses. It's not a question about campus, it's about students' education quality.
學生嘅問題。
Now, apart from school campus teachers, we also are concerned about students. What should we do to our education system to prevent students from committing suicide? How can we stop that? I hope that the government will face this issue and admit that student suicide has to do with our educational system. We don't suggest that this is the only or the direct correlation, but it is at least an important factor. One important factor of causing stress among students is TSA. Even at the primary school level, students face huge pressure because of TSA. So it is a question of whether we can take the rational approach. We should suspend TSA, and there should be a committee which is representative enough to review the TSA in order to convince the public. You may be thinking of ways to shun the issue by providing various alternatives, but in the end, you're just dodging the issue and you are just causing a wider divide, and the problem will only get more serious. I sincerely urge the administration to face this issue squarely and find a proper solution to the problem. What is more is that this policy address regularizes the SENCO post, that is the coordinating teacher for students with special educational needs. It should be provided in our permanent establishment. It is not desirable for form teacher to take up this SENCO post. This is not enough, and there should also be other supporting measures to support this SENCO teacher. Because without continuous support, the SENCO teacher will find the job very difficult. On kindergarten education, we're very concerned about the salary scale for kindergarten teachers. I don't need to repeat this point. At the same time, I'd like to stress that even for pre-primary school teachers, they also need to deal with students with special educational needs. But there is a manpower shortage for the pre-primary sector, and it needs to be addressed. On SEN, I hope that the administration would pay attention to the school social worker ratio, because there seems to be some backpedaling going on. And on this point, I'd like to talk not just about resources, but about politics. It threatens our education system. I hope that our education will be free of any politicized issues. On more national education, we agree that there should be national education, but it should be taught under the framework of civic education. Students should be taught comprehensively knowledge about the country. Mr. Li Fei will be coming to Hong Kong to give a talk, and it will be a valuable talk. But it is astonishing that the talk will be broadcast, and And the government has responded very swiftly to views expressed by the community. There should be financial support to the education policies, but I won't go into detail. Now, I shared my analysis, and in the process, I also consulted frontline teachers, and through the union, conducted an opinion poll. We asked 3 simple questions. One is this: after Mrs. Carrie Lam has assumed office, on various policies, including education and other areas, how would you welcome her policies? 55% accept her policies, and 40% does not accept her new policies. So that's roughly half-half. Now, on education, the question is this: do you think that Mrs. Carrie Lam's education policies represent an improvement? 70% agree or strongly agree. 25% disagree or strongly disagree. So Carrie Lam's administration has shown improvement on education policy comparing to CY Leung administration. Last question: would you accept the education policies laid out in the policy address? Over 60% accept the policies, but 35% are not in agreement with the policies in the policy address. So we need to be fair. We do see a lot of improvement in the government policies in the past 6 months, and there are also concerns. We hope that through full cooperation, the whole community will be confident in our education system, and we will continue to proactively offer our views and comments. And this is the attitude I will continue to adopt. I will speak again on the session about governance. Mr. Andrew Wan. Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Mr. Kim Yun just spoke, and I think that's what he said is very true, and this is understood by all the government officials and legislators here, that we should be objective in giving our views. And I don't think that the government officials should spring on their feet and suggest that we object for the sake of objection. Because in previous exchange and previous debates, you should understand that we did offer views which helped in the formulation of policies. Well, I'd like to focus on housing and land in the next debate, but when it comes to manpower and education, I need to say something on behalf of the workers in Hong Kong. The Chief Executive said in the policy address that we have over $1 trillion reserve in the public office, and we're not short of money. And in fact, over the past decade, the government has been repeating the same tune. In fact, everyone has been saying that the government is flush with cash and more should be done. Now, on labor issues, for example, abolishing the offsetting mechanism of MPF and universal retirement protection, there are many obstacles, and basically the CE shares the same view. There won't be any injection of funds for the abolition of MPF offsetting arrangement. And for the other issue, on one occasion, with objective reasoning, the employers and the employee side agreed on a proposal that is for a pool of funds to be set up. The secretary may have his own views, but if we really want to set aside our differences and try to reach consensus, I think that we could come up with a solution on the issue of MPF offsetting. Otherwise, employees' savings will be eaten up, and then the pillar of the retirement protection will become meaningless. Now, this policy address is also so-called a study report, because many of the proposals will only be looked into, will be studied, including the MPF that I just talked about. Well, interestingly, even before the policy address was delivered, the chief executive was quite determined to import labor, as she talked about it a number of times. It seems that she had more resolve to import labor than to help workers on labor importation and the abolishing the MPF offsetting mechanism. We understand that there are other labor issues that have not yet been resolved. In the last administration, a committee was set up to look into the standard working hours, but now it has resulted in nothing. After years of discussion, standard working hours is nothing but contract working hours. Apart from standard working hours, the other similar issue is minimum wage. Well, in fact, Mr. Wan, you should be talking about this in the third session, but the Secretary for Labor and Welfare is here. I mean, the Undersecretary is here as well. So I'll let you go on, but perhaps you should talk about these points in the third session. I was talking about standard working hours yet to be implemented, and also class action or collective bargaining, and also the paternity leave. It should be increased to 7 days. No consensus yet. And also we should standardize the public holiday and general holidays to make it 17 days altogether. No progress. And also industrial accidents, there should be more enhanced action against occupational safety, and there should be increased penalty for unscrupulous employers. No progress. I don't think it's easy for legislators or politicians to thank the chief executives for the policy address. Ms. Claudia Mo, in the chief executive's policy address, have you put the mic on? Well, in fact, I clipped the mic on earlier, but it fell. But anyway, thank you. Carrie Lam said in the policy address that there is no reason, no justification for requesting the mainland authorities to review the vetting of one-way permits. Now, this is wrong, and it shows that the chief executive is just turning a blind eye to the problem. Clearly, she has neither the determination nor the competence to do that. Let's take a look at Article 22 of the Basic Law. It provides clearly that the Beijing government should consult the Hong Kong SAR government on the number of persons who enter Hong Kong for the purpose of settlement. The Basic Law doesn't say that we do not have the vetting right. There is no need to amend the Basic Law if we want to change that, but Carrie Lam simply ignores the problem. If we really have a high degree of autonomy, then why is it that we do not have the vetting right for the 150 quota of one-way permit per day? We all know that there are bogus marriage certificates and fake travel documents. And there is a suggestion that this is population cleansing, and it exerts so much pressure on the supply of housing in Hong Kong. And even more importantly, the one-way permit system provides a hotbed for corruption on the mainland side, and that is why we should regain control on the number of persons to enter the region for settlement. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I will invite the 4 public officers to respond. Each officer will be given 15 minutes. They may speak for up to for a total of 60 minutes. Chief Secretary.
President, I would like to thank 18 members for their invaluable comments. I will speak on population policy, youth matter, and so on. Now, there's a rapidly aging population in Hong Kong. We also see a decline in manpower supply. In the latest statistics in September this year, for people aged 65 or above, the number will double in the next 20 years. Right now, it's 1.66 million, 16% of the population, and will go up to 2.31 million people, over 30% of the population. And then from now, so we see a demographic structural change, and the government has long been planning for it. We have come up with a comprehensive population policy covering a number of measures so that there could be sustainable development. We could release the potential manpower. We enhance our talents. We bring in new talents, and so on. The purpose is to make sure that our demographic structure can support our economic development. Various initiatives have been implemented. Now we're reviewing all the initiatives so that we can move with the times. On the basis of the current population policy, we will explore in more detail a new strategy and enhance our population in terms of quantity and quality so that we can meet our medium to long-term needs. Because given the latest international trends, we have to make sure that we keep our competitive edge. Now, Hong Kong is going to move into an area where there are both challenges and opportunities. So that's why the Chief Executive spelled out a policy on diversified economy. In the face of keen competition, Hong Kong has to promote high value-added development of industries. And we must also actively promote innovation and technology and creative industries so that there will be no new growth engine for our economy. At the same time, we must seize upon the opportunities presented by the Belt and Road Initiative and the Bay Area development so that we could expand room for development in Hong Kong. Now, we face talent challenges on 3 fronts. One, there is an overall shortage of manpower. So through various means, we need to tap into more sources of manpower. The second challenge is mismatch of manpower. In some industries, there's a shortage of manpower, but then young people at the same time believe there are not enough choices for them. It affects their upward mobility. The third challenge is mismatch of the population with skills. Especially for emerging industries, they need particular kind of skills and talents. And without such talents, we cannot attract overseas investment. The Chief Executive has proposed setting up a committee on manpower planning. I will chair this committee. We will review existing policies and we will promote cross-bureau, cross-department, and cross-sector collaboration so that we could make better use of our human resources. The committee will keep in close liaison with the various sectors. We will also take on board views expressed by different parties. Hopefully, then our manpower planning will be people-based, and we hope to start work early next year. Talents are important for the development of all industries. We want Hong Kong young people to see that there are prospects for them and there are opportunities abound. And we will provide a better training and support so they could learn the necessary skills for them to realize their potential in different positions. This will promote upward mobility. Now, I will be chairing another. I'm also chairing another commission, Commission Youth. The Commission Youth and the Commission on Manpower Planning will complement each other in their work. Now, young people are the most creative and they have the biggest potential. So in the next 5 years, the government will make sure we take care of the studies needs, housing needs, and career needs of young people. We also want to encourage them to participate in politics and in current affairs, public affairs. Young people should have more chance to take part in public affairs, and so the government could better understand their needs and their thinking. So in this term, the government will certainly listen more to the views of young people and pay more attention to their needs. We'll make sure that officials at different levels will have more contact with young people, and we want to better reflect young people's views in our policy. We talk about participation of young people in the community and also their career studies and housing needs. So this covers a huge scope of policy areas. That's why there's proper need to have coordination among different departments, and there must be a full discussion too on various young people issues. Then together we could formulate suitable policies. Now we want to show our determination to work together with young people. That's why last week we started the self-recommendation pilot scheme, so young people will have better chances to take part in politics and in government affairs. Government will also be recruiting 20 to 30 young people who are interested in policy studies. They can then join the proposed Policy Innovation and Coordination Office or unit. And then we will also make sure young people's voices are heard at the senior level of the government. Now, there's been good response so far. We've received 151 applications under the self-recommendation scheme, and there are 684 applications to join the Policy Innovation and Coordination Office. So there's been good response, and I encourage young people to apply before the deadline. Now, in the policy address, there's also space sharing scheme for youth proposed. It's tripartite collaboration among the government and owners. So we encourage industrial building owners to provide sharing space for young people. 2 weeks ago, I announced the details in a press conference. In the first round, there are 10 owners providing a total of 90,000 square meters of floor space. The first batch of the scheme will be rolled out in the first half of the year, and the next batch will be in the second half of the next year. I hope more owners will support this scheme, and then we could support young people in their creative efforts and in the business startups. Now, we need to consolidate resources from different sectors. We have to analyze our manpower needs, and then we could formulate manpower policies. We will listen to views from different sectors, and then for young people with different interests and aptitude, they could realize their full potential. And then there will be plenty of upward mobility for young people. Together, we could take Hong Kong forward. Thank you.
Secretary for Home Affairs. Madam Deputy, the Chief Secretary has given a very comprehensive review on youth policy. For this particular session, I would like to respond to four members, including Ms. Siu Ka-fai, Ms. Hon Chi-wai, Mr. Ma Feng-kwok, and Mr. Gary Chan. Mr. Siu Ka-chun talks about the self-recommendation scheme for young people. This is something the government wants to implement eagerly. This is not something bad. And there are people saying that we should allow young people to more actively participate in government policy. But the point he has made is that 5 committees are just too few. I would like to tell the member that after these 5, we are going to open up more committees for youth participation. We want to achieve some objectives through the self-recommendation scheme. We also attach importance to this process. We have produced an API. Mr. Siu mentioned this in his speech. The Chief Secretary for Administration was asked to appear on the in the API. More than 100,000 people have viewed this API. We have contacted a 250,000 people, and more people know about this scheme through the API. We're going to produce another API. We would try to gauge young people's views on the street about this scheme. So this is the next second API. Through such interaction, we hope that the scheme can be implemented smoothly. Ms. Yong Ho-yan also talks about the self-recommendation scheme. She says that the CE has the vision and the determination to do this, and it's commendable, according to Ms. Yong. She asked whether this scheme is going to work. We asked the same question. So we would like to take it forward in earnest. She also wants to know how the assessment is to be conducted. We have actually publicized the criteria of assessment on the website. We'd like to have young people who are committed to serve the community, and they should know a little bit about the policies issued, and they should have good analytical and communication skills. And we hope young people with these qualities can actively participate. These committees have non-official chairmen. These chairmen and government officials will set up assessment panels to select suitable young persons. The deadline for application is the 30th of November. So members of this council, please tell young people that you can contact, that they can submit their applications. Ms. Yong also mentioned the need to offer internship opportunities. In the past 3 years, in terms of internship places, we have increased the number of places from 1,500 to 3,500. I can give you an example to illustrate this. There's an in-depth internship program. One involves going to the Panda base in Wolong, another in the Palace Museum. The U.S. President has just visited the Palace Museum. He visited the artifact rehabilitation facility. This was actually the internship program in the museum that will be covering. According to one participant, 67% agree, very much agree that this will increase their understanding of cultural artifacts. 27% agreed. And when asked whether this would increase their understanding of life in Beijing, 60% find this very agreeable, 31% agreeable. And also we have asked whether they have deepened their understanding of the museum. 60% said very much so, 20% agreed. Next year, we would like to offer another internship program to Dunhuang. We hope that young people can then gain a deeper understanding on Chinese culture and the country. Mr. Ma Feng-kuo talked about the importance of space, of physical space. The CS4A has mentioned the revitalization scheme for industrial buildings and the offering of 90,000 square feet of premises to young people. I'm grateful to the parties concerned for making this available. Mr. Ma also suggested that, has also mentioned that the facilities and premises of school campuses will be offered to outsiders during non-school hours. Schools this has already started. Schools will be given subsidy and on security services and insurance coverage. Some 100 schools have joined this scheme. We hope more will do so. I have visited some of these schools. They offer the venues or premises to outside participants. And the school principal said this is a win-win situation because their students also stand to benefit. Mr. Gary Chan talks about youth hostel. The program is progressing. The one in Tai Po will be completed at the end of next year. The other will be located in Yuen Long, Sheung Wan, and Jordan. They are under planning and they have made progress. I hope more organizations can help us in building more youth hostels. All in all, these new initiatives are based on past recommendations and even criticism of members. We are now implementing some of the measures in response to those views. And we welcome further views from members so that we can improve on these initiatives. We share a common vision. We want to work hard for our next generation. Thank you.
Secretary for Education. Madam Deputy, I'm grateful to members for their invaluable comments on education. I'm sure we all agree people are the most important factor for Hong Kong to go forward, and education is the key to nurturing talents. Our education objective is to nurture young people to become quality citizens who are socially responsible and equipped with a sense of national identity, a love for Hong Kong, and an international perspective. We hope to provide a stable, caring, inspiring, and satisfying teaching and learning environment for students, teachers, parents, and principals. At the start of this term, the government has already plowed in an additional $3.6 billion of recurrent spending in education, covering the whole spectrum of the education system from kindergartens, primary and secondary schools, integrated education, special education to post-secondary education. And we know that there are already more than 20,000 students who have benefited from the non-means tested subsidy scheme for self-financing undergraduate studies in Hong Kong. We have also increased the teacher-to-class ratio by 0.1, and for public primary and secondary schools, we have 2,000 more graduate teachers posts, and there are other measures too welcomed by the education sector. At the same time, we will uphold the principles of led by professionals, listening to views directly in further studying the deep-seated issues in relation to education. Professor Choi Lap-chi will chair a task force to review the research policy and funding strategy for the tertiary education sector. Professor Anthony Cheung will chair a task force to review the role of self-financing post-secondary institutions and the way forward for the sub-degree programs. The task force is going to have its first meeting next week. There are two working groups under the Education Commission to review the implementation of school-based management, parent education, and homeschool cooperation. There are other issues in relation to professional development teachers, assessment of curriculum, the VPET, and so on. These the relevant work will be announced in phases. The Chief Executive has also injected $3 billion into the Research Endowment Fund to provide scholarships so we can encourage more local students to take up postgraduate research programs, and we're going to seek funding from as soon as possible. Now, for the 8 institutions funded by the UGC, there's a shortfall of 30,600 hostel places. This will affect the students in benefiting from the experience of hostel life, and also universities won't be able to take in more non-local students or receive more exchange students. This will stand in the way of the university becoming more international. So we need to do something about it. Now, the universities have plenty of experience in building hostels. We believe we don't need to go by the current capital works process in approving funding for the building of hostels. We should allow room for universities to take up innovative designs. So we propose to set up a hostel demand fund. We'll inject $12 billion into it, and through streamlined procedure, we could provide funding to UGC, which in turn could fund the building of hostels. We will be consulting the panel on education soon. We hope we will have member support and benefit students. Some members mentioned vocational training. Now, we've always been promoting vocational and professional education and training, VPT. We encourage students to join different industries based on their own interests and abilities. Outside of tertiary education, we provide many progression pathways for young people. But then the stakeholders still believe VPET is inferior to traditional academic education. Such bias won't bode well for the development of VPET. We believe the government, the employers and training institutions and also secondary schools should work more closely together to promote VPET. That's why the government is going to set up a working group on the promotion of VPET. So we can see how we can take forward such a promotional effort. The task force on promotion of vocational education put forward various recommendations. So the working group will also see how these recommendations can be implemented and further promote VPT. We'll also make sure there is close cooperation between the business sector and schools so that the manpower, so the training meets our manpower needs. We also propose to set up, to inject another $1.2 billion to support to the Qualifications Framework Fund so that we could enhance the recognition of qualifications in different trades. This will help to promote lifelong learning in meeting Hong Kong's manpower needs. Many members mentioned Chinese history teaching. Now, in 2018 to 17, Chinese history will become an independent compulsory subject in the junior secondary curriculum. This is to make sure that students have a comprehensive Chinese history education. We have also started the second round of consultation on the revision of the curriculum. Some members expressed concern about whether certain subjects could be taught. Well, the Chinese history is really about spelling out the development of the country and covering important issues with far-reaching implications on the development of a country. So it's not possible for the curriculum to cover all historical events. Now, but can the Chinese history lessons include certain events? Well, it depends on the learning objectives and whether it can be fit into the curriculum. So the Education Bureau will listen carefully to the views expressed in the second round of consultation. And then after a thorough discussion, there will be a professional decision made by the Council and the Curriculum Committee. We want children to learn to have a sense of national identity. I think it's to the duty of any education system. It doesn't matter what political stance we have, we must not be biased in the way we look at Chinese history education. I'm against the use of terms like Maynardization in such Chinese history education, and don't call it politics either. And I cannot agree that that we should agree to saying that we could be allowed to be indiscreet for the right reason. Now, I think we should pass on the fine Chinese culture and history. We must therefore, and then we can make contributions to this country and society. Now, some members expressed concern about the BCA, as the Chief Executive pointed out, or the TSA. Now, the Chief Executive said that we will complete a study, and there is now a coordination committee on the BSCA. They are now collecting views from different stakeholders to follow up on the plan. And after review, the committee will submit a report to the Education Bureau. The report is expected to be completed either end of this year or early next year. The Education Bureau will then consider the recommendations of the committee and make a decision on the BCA arrangements from 2018 and after. Now, many members expressed concern that I'll be under pressure in my work, and therefore the education policy will be affected. Well, I would say that most of the pressure came mostly from members of this council in the past few months, and also my own commitment to education work. Now, and when I perform my duties, I will only put the interests of Hong Kong students at heart, so members could rest assured. I would like to thank members again for their invaluable views. The Education Bureau will continue to listen carefully and take action in improving our policies. We will hope also to work with members and the education sector, so together we could implement the various initiatives announced in the policy address. We can then build a better learning environment for our students. Thank you.
Secretary for Labour and Welfare. Madam Deputy, I thank the honourable members for their valuable views and suggestions. Just now, the Chief Secretary already responded to the general population policy, and I'd just like to supplement some points. I think one controversial point during this session of debate is importation of labour. 4 members were in favour, and 4 other members were against labour importation. Mr. Tommy Cheung, Mr. Frankie Yik, and Mr. Pt2, etc., talked about the difficulty in recruiting sufficient manpower for different industries such as the logistics and transportation industries, and I also heard the concerns expressed by unionists. I'd like to share with you my view on labour importation. Mr. Poon Siu Ping mentioned whether we have ignored the fact that there are cases of using one-way permit for the purpose of a family reunion. In fact, the Census and Statistics Department does keep statistics on this issue. But the point is, over the past few years, the 150 quota per day indeed were used up. But 2 years ago, we relaxed the requirement of children coming to Hong Kong for family reunion. And very soon, after implementation, the number of cases dropped. And in fact, very soon the level will drop further to 100 per day. And still, we monitor closely the issue surrounding one-way permit. But the point is, without a one-way permit system, by 2026, our population will drop, such that the birth rate will fall below the death rate. We need to consider replacement in our population. We have 60,000 newborns every year, and if each baby has a mortality of 90 years old, then in the long run, we only have a 4.5 million population. But now our population stands at 7 million. I think that we need to think about our population. From now to 2022, according to the CNSD, this is the peak period for our labour force, but starting from 2022, the level of labour force will decline. And the projection has taken into account the increase in the labour participation rate by the aged, and also the increasing women's participation rate in the labour force. However, on the whole, the labour force will shrink starting from 2022. And there are also other statistical questions. For example, why is it that for the labour participation rate for all age groups, despite the fact that they're on the rise, the overall labour force is still shrinking? I think that members are very concerned about labour importation, but we also need to consider this from the perspective of the Hong Kong SAR government. We need to enhance training. We need to upgrade the professional image of individual sectors to make the sectors more attractive. Indeed, this is what we should do, but for some industries or sectors, even after attracting new blood to the industry, if there is still an acute manpower shortage, we do need to explore with the industry players how we can import labour in a targeted manner on an appropriate scale. About the elderly care services, many members commented on this. Mr. Poon Siu Ping said that for subvented homes, the pays are better, but why is it still not attractive enough? The median income is $12,000 for all homes, but for subvented homes, indeed, like Mr. Poon Siu Ping said, the median income is 15,000. However, for subsidized homes, the vacancy rate is 18%, whereas for private homes, the vacancy rate is only 8%. So with a wage difference of $3,000, the vacancy rate differs by 10%. I think the labor sector understands that for private homes, labor importation is possible, and that accounts for the difference. Responding to Mr. Leung Yiu-chung's speech, if you've read the policy agenda, if you've read the recent press releases, you might want to rewrite your speaking notes, because he suggested that we should improve the pay conditions and we should give pay rises first. In fact, this is set out in the policy agenda. What we talk about is that after improving the pay conditions, if we still are unable to attract new blood and recruit sufficient manpower, how can we take care of the elderly? And I think that very often the government policies bear the brunt of criticisms, and I find this very interesting. Usually, I mean, before I joined the government, we often commented on government policies such as the following. Perhaps the government would say that the policy would set a precedent, or it may be read across. It may set precedents. Now, on the issue of importing labor, we only consider the difficulties facing an individual sector. It won't spread across different sectors. We consider the issues of precedents and read across, but these are the issues that we really need to mull over and analyze. The other issue is women in the labor force. And in the policy address, as we pointed out, we commissioned Hong Kong U to conduct a study and give recommendations to the government on unleashing the potential of women in the labor force. The consultancy study is expected to be completed next year. But I'd also like to add a footnote on this point. When we talk about this issue, we sometimes can be quite utilitarian. It seems that we introduce all these supporting measures to help women join the labor force, but in fact, in English, there are two important principles: pro-choice and pro-child. That is to say, if we're able to provide adequate and quality childcare service, we will be able to allow homemakers, either women or men, to choose to stay at home, to look after family, or to join the labor force. The other principle is that for all the child care or after-school care program services, what we want to achieve is to provide a good environment for children and for young people to grow. It's not just about making people join the labor force, but of course this is one important consideration in our population policy. Mr. Charles Mok mentioned how more I&T courses can be included under Continuous Education Fund. At the panel on manpower meeting to be held on 21st in this council, we are going to brief members on our latest study. I hope that Mr. Charles Mok can attend the panel meeting so that we can discuss this issue. On maternity leave, I think that we can leave the discussion to the next session, Mr. President, but it also touches on the labor issue. Mr. Felix Chung mentioned that if we extend the period of maternity leave, whether we will experience labor shortage. I'd just like to make 2 points. From international experience, extending maternity leave would increase women's participation rate in the labor force. I don't know whether this holds true in Hong Kong, but one may ask, whether increasing the participation rate has anything to do with me as an employer. I may be hiring someone who would take a 10-week leave. In fact, for some sectors, it may be easy to find a substitute worker to take up the job for 10 weeks instead of 14 or 15 weeks. And some members commented on the checklist for talents. I won't go into that in great detail, except to say that there is a misunderstanding in the community. In fact, 2 years ago, a fake checklist was circulated on the internet. In fact, we haven't even drawn up a checklist. That one was false. In the coming few months, we are going to consult the relevant stakeholders, and our consultant will make recommendations to the government. And in due course, we will brief members on the recommendations. About students or young people suicide cases, the interdisciplinary group is still doing preparation work. In due course, we will explain the details to members, but we're happy to seek views from members as well. As for other issues relating to labor and welfare, I will give a consolidated response after listening to members in the next debate. I so submit, Mr. President. I urge members to support this motion on the vote of thanks.
The second debate session ends. We now proceed to the third debate session.